Hey everybody, we are back for another episode of Balance and Breakthroughs with Will. And today I wanted to welcome everybody to the show where we explore a movement that challenges us, stretches us, and ultimately transforms us into who we are called to become. I'm your host, Wil Singleton, of course you know, and today's conversation is about resilience, purpose, and living a life that goes beyond surface level success. I love hearing about this. My guest today is Terry Tucker, a former NCAA Division I athlete, a SWAT team negotiator, love that, business leader, cancer warrior, motivational speaker, and author of the newly released book, Sustainable Excellence, which is the best title I've heard so far. Terry's journey is not just inspiring, but it's instructive. We faced adversity most of us can't imagine, and instead of allowing it to define his limits, he has used it to redefine what's possible. His work challenges us to rethink success, lean into significance, and build excellence that actually lasts. Mm, 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 mm. So if you're navigating a season of challenge, searching for clarity, or striving for a breakthrough in your life, this conversation is definitely for you and me. So let's go for it. All right, Terry, you are on.
Well, thanks for having me on. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Okay, all right, all right. So, just tell us a little bit about yourself before I start shooting questions at you.
Sure. So, grew up on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall. And as you mentioned, I played college basketball at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina,
Hmm.
despite having three knee surgeries in high school. When I graduated from college, I was actually the first person in my family to graduate from college. I moved home to find a job. And I was lucky. I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That
Okay,
was the good
okay.
news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer.
Wow.
After Wendy's, I ended up kind of following my dream, my passion, and that was to get into law enforcement. And I was a 37-year-old rookie police officer. I'll tell you this, well, I took a whole lot more Tylenol in the police academy than my younger counterparts. But it was something I always wanted to do. And I eventually became a SWAT hostage negotiator. After
So,
that, I
were you
started
the
this.
oldest? Were you the oldest to
No, I
actually
wasn't.
start?
There was a 52-year-old guy that was in the class as well. He had an
Okay.
entire career in the insurance business and decided he wanted to get back to his community and got into law enforcement at 52.
Wow, that's cool.
So,
That's very
yeah,
cool.
yeah, I was lucky I wasn't the oldest.
But you were sharing Tylenol.
I was, yes. We had a big bottle. We bought the big bottle at Sam's Club. It's like, here, we're going to need this.
Okay, okay.
So after law enforcement, I started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball when we lived in Texas. But for the last 14 years now, as you mentioned, I've been a cancer warrior. I've been battling a rare form of melanoma. And then
Hmm.
just finally, my wife and I have been married for 32 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Oh, really? Well, that's cool. That's really cool. Okay, okay. So they're all kind of following your trail of success, of sustainable success.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I look back. I'm 6'8". I played college basketball. I got a brother who's 6'7", who pitched for the University of Notre Dame's baseball team. Another
Hmm.
brother who's 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So we used to joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on at the front of the church. But our mom, our 5'8" mother was the boss. It didn't
Mm.
matter how big, tall, strong we were.
Right,
Whatever
right,
mom
right.
said, that's the way it went. And we had such a great life because it was all about helping each other, promoting each other, being there for each other. And when I graduated from college, I remember one night my youngest brother had a high school basketball game. And I told my dad, I said, I'm not going to Brian's game. I'm going to go work out afterwards. My
Okay.
dad was like, no, you're not. And I'm like, what do you mean? No, I'm not. I'm a man. I have my own job. I have a college,
Right,
I'm
right.
like, I'm going to go work out. He said, no, you're going to your brother's game. He said, you don't understand. He said, you need to be there for your brother. Your brother knows that I am dying of cancer. You need to be there to support him. And my dad was right. I was just being a jerk. I
Mm,
was just trying to, puff out my chest and say, I can do whatever I want.
yeah.
So I found another time to work out and I went to my brother's game. But that's what our family had been about growing up. It was
Hmm.
all about sports. Mom and dad used to do what I call divide and conquer parenting, where, I'd have a game on Thursday night at 5 o'clock at this location, and my
Hmm.
brother would have a practice, at 5 o'clock on Thursday night at another location. So dad's going with me, mom's going with my brother, and that was our life during the week. But Sundays were always set aside for, the good home cooked meal. We were always around the table. We were always, as a family on Sunday. We tried to do it during the week,
Yeah.
but I had the greatest childhood just because of the relationship I had with my brothers and my parents. And my brothers and I are still very close. We talk every
Mm.
week and things like that. So it was, being successful after that really wasn't too hard because I think our parents set the example.
Okay. Okay. So how did all that evolve into this mission to help people live an uncommon and extraordinary life?
Yeah, it was really when I got cancer. In 2012, I was diagnosed with this rare form of cancer. I was 51 years old. I was the exact same age that my father was when my father was diagnosed.
Hmm.
And I was told that more than likely in 2 years I'd be dead. And I thought, well, okay, you gave me a death sentence. How do I turn this death sentence into a life sentence?
Hmm.
And Will, this is always, I've always felt this cancer journey has been about something that's bigger than me. And I think we all suffer in our own ways, but I think you have to find meaning in your misery. And that's really kind of what this was about. It was, okay, I've got this disease. It's probably going to kill me. All right, I have no control over when I die, but I
Hmm.
certainly have control over what I do every day and how I live and how I show up and how I present myself. And kind of like you and I were talking. You do public speaking in the schools. I had started a public speaking business, and COVID hit.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and, and this is a true story. And so like everything else shut down. There's nothing in person. There's nothing remotely. Nothing's going on. And a friend of mine reached out and said, "Hey Terry, would you like to be a guest on my podcast?" And I said, sure. What's a podcast? I had no idea what a podcast was. And he explained it to me. And I said, all right, I'll try it.
Hmm.
And Will, I was terrible. I was horrible on my first podcast. I mean, I had posted notes all around the camera. He'd ask me a question and I'd kind of lean in and read one of the posted notes. I provided no value to the audience. But then I kind of stepped back and I said, well, I like this. But the first time I drove a car, I wasn't any good at it. The
Right,
first
right.
time I cooked a meal, I think I burned the water. You can't burn water, just in case you're interested. I mean, the
We can
first
try to
time,
burn water.
yeah, exactly, right. So it was, all right, how can I get good at this? And I
Hmm.
remember somebody once told me, never make a point without telling a story, and
Hmm.
never tell a story without making a point. And I thought, okay, I've got to come up with stories now. I've got to, whether they're my own or things that I've heard from other people. And when I make a point, I've got to tell a story. And that started me down the road of podcasting. And to this point, I've probably been a guest on 800 podcast, radio, or television
Wow.
shows around the world. And I've met so many great people because of
Hmm.
that. And hopefully, I've made a positive impact, a positive difference on somebody. And I'll end with this. I had a young man about 6 months ago sent me an email and he said, I just listened to this episode that you were on this podcast, and I
Hmm.
really needed to hear that. I said,
Hmm.
great. I said, what was the name of the podcast? And he told me. And Will, I didn't remember it. And so I went back and looked, and it was a podcast I had done 2.5 years ago
Huh.
that he had found the episode and he needed to hear that. So, the things that you're doing, with your podcast and things like that, the things that I'm doing, these things are evergreen.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
they're they're going to be out there. and people are going to be able to access them. So, I try to provide as much value as I can when I do this.
It's still surreal for me when someone comes back and talks to me about something I said that I don't even remember that
Yeah.
made a huge impact with them. And I'm like, you sure that was me?
Yeah.
But it's just, I mean, biblically it says, we have life or death in the tongue. And I believe when we have this purpose that is bigger than ourselves, we really speak life exponentially through this media that we've got now through podcasting and social media. It can become a real powerful force for good. Um, you said bigger than yourself, and just working with people who are just struggling. How do they get to that concept or that perception of something that's bigger than themselves?
I think we're so, especially society, we're all caught up in, in what we're doing. Like
Hmm.
this is important. And, I'm old enough to remember Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers and Mr.
Yeah,
Rogers' Neighborhood.
I remember that
And
too.
yeah, okay, all right, see, you're admitting, all right, there you go.
We've
So
totally
there
dated
was
ourselves now.
exactly these old guys. What am I talking? It's like
Right.
so. I remember hearing a story that when Fred Rogers died in 2003, his family was going through his effects and they
Mhm.
found his wallet. And inside his wallet was a scrap piece of paper on which Mr. Rogers had written four simple words. And those words were life is for service. So, when
Wow.
I get, and I get down, I feel sorry, especially when I go for
Mhm.
my cancer treatments and stuff like that. There are days I'm not feeling really great. But when I'm in that, what am I doing? I'm looking inward, oh, woe is me, look how bad I feel sorry for me, and
Mhm.
things like that. And I find a real easy way to get out of that is to go and help somebody else. To go, I sit in the waiting room waiting to be called back for my treatment. And you can tell the newbies,
Yeah.
that are there. They got the deer in the headlights look. They're scared and stuff like that. So I can wheel over in my wheelchair and say, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Terry. What's
Mhm.
your name?" And all of a sudden they're seen as another human being, not as a cancer patient, not as a number, not as an infusion center patient. They're seen as a human being.
Mhm.
And there's a there's a professor, a psychology professor at the University of Chicago, who does this experiment with his students. And I love this. The idea is you go out and get on a bus, and in three questions, you go deep with somebody. So you get on a bus, sit down next to somebody. Hey, how you doing? "Oh, I'm fine. How are you? Question one. And I'm just making this up. Question two, what do you do for a living?
Mhm.
Oh, I'm a doctor. Question three, have you always wanted to be a doctor? It doesn't matter what they tell you. They could say, no, I grew up on a farm and I wanted to be a veterinarian, but X, Y, and Z happened.
Yeah.
Or my mother was a doctor, but she died of breast cancer at 40, so I'm honoring her memory by becoming a doctor. Whatever they tell you, they're telling you their why, their how, their purpose
Mhm.
in life. And Will, social media doesn't allow us to go deep with people anymore. Everything's on the surface. And if
Mm.
we can go deep with those people, that's kind of my mission now. I mean, I don't care how much money I make. I don't care, how many podcasts I've been on. It's can I go deep with another human being? Because a
Yeah.
100 years from now, nobody's going to remember you and I were here.
Mhm.
But what people will remember are the deep, kind, caring relationships that we have with others
Mhm.
while we're alive today.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the deep connections we make that really make a difference.
Yeah,
And I think, like you said with social media, there's a lot of positives, but there are major negatives where it can create a superficial kind of connecting with people that doesn't really hit the heart, and and
right.
and I'll see a lot of people on social media who have this facade of faith and happiness, but if you just scratch just a little under the surface, you see a lot of unhealed damage. And I think that's what's really powerful about finding the mission bigger than ourselves, which is in service. So in that, looking back on your journey, what was the defining breakthrough moment when choosing resilience completely changed the direction in your life?
That's a great question. I don't know if I can define an actual moment. I mean, when I was in high school, I was a really good high school basketball player, and then I ended up having 3 knee surgeries. And I remember when I went back playing after those knee surgeries, my mind was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my brain. Like, you're probably a step slower since your surgeries, and college coaches aren't going to be interested in recruiting you. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still reaching out about the possibility of playing for their college or university. I learned early, and that, I was probably 15 years old at the time, that I needed to change the narrative. I needed to change what my mind what was thinking, what was going on. And if you think about it, I mean, the Cleveland Clinic estimates that we have somewhere between 50 and 70,000 thoughts that pass through our
Yeah.
mind every day,
Hmm.
most of which we pay no attention to.
Hmm.
But those thoughts, they're neutral, they're arbitrary. They just come and they go. They're not a threat to us. They're not a problem. Where we get to the problem is when we start thinking about those thoughts and we start assigning, relationships or feelings or emotions to those thoughts. That's when we get into a problem. And I know when I was writing my books, there were times you would get, kind of like authors, writer's block. It's
Hmm.
like I don't know what to. And I found a real easy way for me to handle that was to take my hands off the keyboard, to just close my eyes, and to sort of clear my mind out.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, thoughts would, pop through my mind. Like, gee, I really wish I could get a pizza right now. It's like, okay, that's just an arbitrary thought. It just popped, it went in, it went out.
Hmm.
But
Right.
over time, I would start to get thoughts that would help me with the writing. So it's not the fact that we have thoughts, it's how we think or process those thoughts that we need to concern ourselves with. So I learned at 15 that I needed to change the narrative, that I needed to not focus on the negative. It's kind of like in basketball, and Mike Krzyzewski, Coach K from Duke, talks about the next play. So, you take a shot and you miss. Well, what can you do? You can complain, you can worry, you can say, "Oh, that's a terrible shot. I should."
Hmm.
Well, all you're doing is worrying about you got to get on to the next play because you can't do a darn thing about what has happened. The ref didn't make the right call, or you threw the ball out of bounds, or you shouldn't have taken whatever.
Hmm.
It's done. It's over. Move forward. And I think we spend way too much time focusing on the past, and I'm not saying we shouldn't look at the past. You
Right.
certainly should. You should learn from it. But focusing on it, especially as life is moving forward, why are you trapping yourself? Why are you giving
Hmm.
space in your brain to something that you have no control over anymore? Move forward, make a better shot. They always used to say in basketball, good shooters have short memories. You know
Hmm.
what? I missed that
Hmm.
last shot. I'm going to shoot the next one because I know I'm a good shooter and that kind of thing. You can use that process in your life. You can't do anything about the past, but you certainly can do something about what's going on in the present. And that's what I try to do.
So at 15, you learn to reframe your mindset to not focus so much on the negative thoughts because we all have
Right,
negative thoughts.
right, right.
And that's amazing because I think so many people in our society they get stuck there. And how do you coach people to shake it off? I mean, like I know from being in sports, you got to shake it off so you can keep
Yeah,
playing.
yeah.
But it seems like our society has just gotten stuck in not only diagnosing the sickness, but using the sickness to create a new identity of being broken instead of rebuilt. I mean, how did you turn your mission into resilience instead of resentment?
Yeah, yeah. There's a great book which name just went right out of my head. But it talks about and I look at how I was raised. So when I went to preschool and I went to kindergarten, that was about socialization.
Hmm.
That was about learning how to okay, I got picked last for the kickball game. How do I process that?
Right,
Or you and I want the purple crayon. How do you and I work that out so
right.
that we can share it and things like
Hmm.
that? And the book talks about it today, parents are so focused my kid's got to go to Harvard or Yale or, whatever great school they're at. And so we've gotten away from the socialization. And now when you're in preschool and kindergarten, you got to be able to count, to 50 by fives and and you and I didn't have that growing up. When we were in kindergarten, it was all about socialization.
Yeah.
How do we work together as human beings? And we've lost that. And I think we've got to get back to that. We've got to let kids, I'm not going to say fight over things, but learn how to work things out instead
Mm,
of, oh, you said something, now I'm triggered and my whole life is a mess.
mm.
Why? I said something, big deal. I didn't hurt you physically or anything.
Right.
Move on with your life. I'm from the generation that, you know what? Something needs to get done. You got to step up and do it.
Mm.
And I don't care how, if it's clean out the stalls and, in the barn, if it's sweep the halls, I always tell people, especially young people, whatever you do, I don't care if you're a janitor, be the best janitor
Mhm.
you can possibly be. Because that mindset of whatever I do, I'm going to be the best at, that carries over, just like the mindset of, oh,
Mhm.
I'm a victim. That carries
Mhm.
over today too. I
Mhm.
don't want to be a victim. I mean, I could say, hey, why did I get cancer? Why did I, get terminal cancer when I was 51 years old?
Mhm.
I don't know why. Nobody's ever been able to tell me. I've had
Right.
all 88 genes that, doctors know of or suspect cause every form of cancer tested, and I have absolutely no mutations in any of my genes for any form of cancer. Yet
Mm.
I got this incredibly rare form of deadly cancer. I've never said why because I don't, why, what good does that do?
Right.
I've got it. Can I turn it into something positive? And
Mhm.
I always said, I've done more living in the 14 years I've been dying of cancer
Mhm.
than I've done in
Mhm.
my entire life. And I had a pretty good life before I got sick.
Okay. Okay. So when you say control your mind or it will control you, this is what you're talking about, you know,
I
uh,
am.
not
Yeah.
letting the resentments rule you. Was that difficult for you? Or do you think your upbringing gave you an extra advantage to that?
I mean, I was very lucky to have to go through, three knee surgeries in high school. I mean, one, maybe, yeah, you hurt yourself playing sports or something, but
Mhm.
three, I was like, man, it was just like, it just kept coming. It was just,
Mhm.
and so I'll give you another true story. When I was in college at the Citadel, we had a president one year, my sophomore year, by the name of James Stockdale.
Mhm.
And Stockdale had been the highest ranking prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam conflict. He was a naval aviator. He was shot down, and he actually won the Medal of Honor for how he organized the prisoners
Mhm.
in the prison. And I remember, he was the president of college. I was a kid. I didn't spend a lot of time around him. But I remember being at an event one time where somebody asked him, who were the people that survived that torture, that brutality, that ugliness? And he said, well, let me tell you who didn't survive. He said it wasn't the big, strong, tough guys who thought that they could handle any kind of abuse or torture. And the next thing he said really surprised me. He said the other group that didn't survive were the optimists. He said these were the guys that thought they would be rescued or let
Mm.
go by Thanksgiving, Christmas, or Easter. And he said those holidays would come and go and they wouldn't be rescued. And he said those guys died of a broken heart. He
Mm.
said the people that survived were the people who understood what they could control, which according to Stockdale was basically the thoughts in our mind and the breathing in our lungs.
Mhm.
Everything else was at the discretion of the enemy and controlled it. And Will, I think that's the problem. We try to control all these things that are going on in our lives that we have no control over whatsoever. And I've done this before. I learned this from my dad.
Mhm.
If you're struggling with something, take a piece of paper and write down on it everything that's bothering you about whatever that situation or problem is. And once you've got everything out on a piece of paper, go through and cross out everything that you don't have any control over. Whatever's left on that piece of paper is what you can focus your efforts on. And I think that's what Stockdale was saying.
Mm.
You know, there's what if are they going to beat me today? Am I going to get food today? Am I going to get
Mhm.
mail? Am I going to get a red per? you have no control over any of that whatsoever. So why are you focusing on that? And I think that's where I'm looking from at my notes because I'm trying to find there's a thing called the Stockdale Paradox, and I want to
Hmm.
get it right. And this is what Stockdale said. He said, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever those facts may be." So you can never lose faith, but you also got to be honest with yourself and say,
Mm.
hey, I need to improve here. I need to get better here. And that's called the Stockdale Paradox.
Okay.
And it's just such a great thing. Never lose faith that you're going to be successful, but also understand where you are in terms of preparing yourself for the job, for the game,
Hmm.
for, whatever you're doing in life.
Mm. Mm. So you've coached people with this mindset. So
Yeah.
what was what was it like to coach the first person? How did they react with this whole concept of controlling your mind or it'll control you? How did they react?
So when I first started coaching basketball,
Hmm.
I coached at a school, I coached girls, which that was in and of itself interesting for me because I had never, I didn't have any sisters. So, I mean, my whole life had been about boys' sports, men's sports.
Right.
And I coached at a school where they never expected the girls to do anything important. They never expected them to win. And I used to wear a suit to every home game or to every
Hmm.
every game, home and away. And parents were like, "Why are you wearing a suit?" And I said, because I want these young ladies to understand that this is an important event, that I'm just not out here in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, kind of blowing a whistle. I want them to realize this is important, so I'm going to look the best that I can. And so I had to change a culture. And the culture was, I remember we did a drill for almost an entire practice
Mm.
because I knew they could get it, but they failed every single time. And
Mm.
I'm like, all right, do it again. All right, do it again. Do it again. And occasionally I'd give him a bribe, like, all right, go get a drink of water. I said, we can stop this drill now if Danielle hits a free throw. So I line up for a free throw. All right, Danielle missed the free throw. Okay, we're doing it again. And eventually they got it. Now they
Mm.
were exhausted,
Hmm.
but they got it. But it was changing the culture of, you know what? Whatever you do in life, give it your all, give it
Mm.
your best. And I know you guys can do this. I believe in you. I have faith in you. And that's, I think, what you have to, especially for young kids, they're looking, they're desiring. It's like, tell me I'm good. Tell me I can do things. I can. But you know what I can't do? I can't do it for you. You've got to go do it.
Mm.
And I promise you, I'm not going to put you in situations where you're going to fail unless I'm looking for you to fail so that I can get something positive into your head, into your mind on that. So it was, I mean, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'll give you a story, it's a true story. So we're in the middle of a game, and I point to one of the girls on the bench. I'm like, go in for so and so. And she shakes her head yes. And I go
Hmm.
back to coaching, and I can see out of the corner of my eye the scorer's table, and there's nobody there.
Hmm.
And so I look back at her and I'm like, get in for so and so. And she shakes her head yes again. And again, I go back to the scores, to the game. Out of the corner of my eye, scores table, nobody there. And I look at her a third time and I'm like, get in the game. All of a sudden, she starts, no, she's like shaking me off like a major league pitcher, who doesn't like the sign that they've just been given. And I'm like, what? And so I bring her to me, and we are having a counseling session in the middle of a high school basketball game. And I'm like, why don't you want to go in the game?
Hmm.
And then the tears start down the cheeks. And she looks at me and she said, Coach, I might make a mistake, and my friends are in the stands and they'll make fun of me if I make a mistake. And I said,
Mm.
what about your responsibility to your teammates? You come out here every day. You work hard to get better individually and to make your teammates better. What do you owe them?
Mm.
And that was the hook that I got her with. She said, oh, okay, I'll eventually go into the game. But that peer pressure, and you work
Mm.
with kids in school, that peer
Hmm.
pressure, of what will other people say about me? What will they laugh at me? Will they make fun of me if I make a mistake? Yeah,
Hmm.
they probably will. But you know what? You can overcome that. I mean,
Yeah.
when I was 14 or 13 years old, I was 6'5". I had a size 14 shoe, and I had ears that would rival Dumbo in the Disney movie and stuff like that. And I got teased mercilessly because of
Hmm.
my appearance. But I put that ugliness into practicing basketball.
Mm.
And the more I practiced, the better I got. And the better I got, the more I wanted to practice. So it was just a matter of, yes, I know you're making fun of me, but by God, someday I'm going to get a scholarship to college. And I
Right.
did get that scholarship. So,
Nice. 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 So in your book, you talk about four truths that you've developed. Which one do you find people struggle with the most and why? And one, can we talk about the four truths?
sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So the fortress, I have them here on a post-it note. And
Okay.
so I see them every day. So they constantly get reinforced in my mind. The
Hmm.
first one is control your mind, or your mind is going to control you.
Hmm.
The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. The third one I look at as kind of a legacy truth, excuse me, and it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one I think is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I've been asked, is there one that's more important than the other truths? And I used to say, no, they're all equally important.
Hmm.
But the more I read, the more I researched, the more I thought back on my life or viewed other people's lives, I think that first one, control your mind or your
Hmm.
mind is going to control you, really is the most important. Because if you can't control your mind, if it's taking you to places where it's not good, it's never going
Yeah.
to be, you're never going to do it.
Hmm.
Small minds and weak people kill big dreams.
Mm.
Most people live their entire lives without ever contemplating what it means to be great at something purposeful in their lives.
Hmm.
If you want to overcome the difficulties that you experience in life, you have to control the thoughts in your mind because we all become what we think.
Hmm. So which one of those would be the hardest for someone to grasp and to implement?
I think the control your mind,
The control
because
your mind? Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's what I was
if
thinking
if you
too.
if you think about it, if you took a basketball and you went out on the court and you shot free throws, if
Hmm.
we could look at your mind, your brain under an MRI, there'd be a
Hmm.
certain part of your brain that would light up, that would be what was engaged.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, if you thought about taking a basketball, going out on that court and shooting those free throws, that exact same part of your brain would light up under an MRI. So your
Hmm.
brain doesn't know whether you're doing it or whether you're thinking about it. So
Right.
again, we all become what we think. If you tell yourself, I'm no good at algebra, I'm going to fail this course, I'm going to fail this. If you tell yourself that enough times, you will eventually wire your brain to the point where, yeah, you know
Mm.
what? I'm no good at algebra and that.
Yeah.
So be very, Bruce Lee, the martial artist, used to talk about how you should be very careful what you say to yourself. And I mean, I'll be honest with you. Well, I talk to myself. I mean, I think we all do.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but be careful what you say to yourself, because if you say
Mhm.
something negative over and over and over, eventually you'll hardwire your brain to do that.
Yeah.
Say positive things to yourself. Say, I can do this. I want to do this. I
Hmm.
will do this. Use action words, because your brain will click onto that. Be like, yeah, I can do this.
Hmm.
And it's amazing how far that'll take you in life.
Yeah. I've seen so many people repeat dysfunctional lies or misconceptions to the point where it becomes a truth,
Yeah.
and it just wrecks them. It just continues to, like, almost melt their dreams, because you're like feeding your soul poison, you know.
Yeah.
And it's such a sad thing, but and that's what they become comfortable with, and when in your book Sustainable Excellence, it focuses on the principles to be extraordinary and have an extraordinary life. But my question is, because I love the phrase of extraordinary, um Do you find it challenging when people want this extraordinary life, but they also want this extraordinary comfort?
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you reconcile that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I want it, but I don't really want to work real hard for it
Yeah,
and that kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you this story. So, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was told I was probably going to be dead in 2 years. And I've seen patients, I've seen people, that I was in the waiting room basically turn their entire life over to somebody in a white coat with initials after their name. And one of the big questions I think people need to ask themselves, and this is going to sound really weird, especially when you're diagnosed with cancer, especially if you're diagnosed with something terminal, the question is, do you want to live?
Mm,
Now, for you and I, it's like, well, of course we want it. But the answer for a lot of people, the answer is, well, yeah, but I don't really want to go through all the pain and the
mm,
difficulty that I will need to do, kind of like what you were just saying. I don't want to go through the tough times, the hard work to
hmm.
to make it so that I might be able to live.
Yeah.
And and that's what I think is important. The other thing I think that is important is you've got to have something to look forward to.
Mm,
I remember when I was diagnosed, our daughter was in high school, and I went through all the stages that we would probably associate with grief. First it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right. Then it was anger. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right. Then there was a bargaining with God. Hey, could you let me live long enough to see my daughter graduate from high school? This is a very, could be a very difficult time in her life, and I'd like to be there as her father. And then I absolutely got down, got depressed, felt
hmm.
sorry for myself, but then came out the other end and was like, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck.
Yeah.
These are the cards that I've been dealt. I'm going to have to play these cards to the best of my ability. And I
Hmm.
think when you get to that point where I don't like what's in front of me, but I'm going to play it to the best of my ability. That's when that mind shift happens in your life. And
Hmm.
so many people never get to that point. So many people just, oh, I'm going to die. This is terrible. It's like, yeah, it is terrible. But you need to become comfortable. And my players I said this all the time. You need to become comfortable being uncomfortable because that's the only way you grow. The only
Hmm.
way you get better, the only way you improve is if you do things that are uncomfortable. So I will challenge your audience with this because I do this every day in my life. Every day, do one thing that makes you
Mm.
nervous, that scares you, that makes you uncomfortable,
I like
that's
that.
potentially embarrassing.
Mm,
It doesn't have to be a big thing, but if you do those small things every day,
mm,
when the big disasters in life hit us, and they
mm,
hit all of us, we lose somebody who's close to us, we unexpectedly get let go from our job, we
hmm,
find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness, you will be so much more resilient to
hmm.
handle those things than people who never challenge themselves.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. One abnormal thing that makes you nervous a day. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay. So in the extraordinary life, why do you think people have developed a mindset to settle for less in life when I believe that everybody's designed for an extraordinary life?
Mhm.
Um, how do you think that people get to the point where they just settle for less and less and less? How does that happen, in your opinion?
Because they don't control their brain. I mean, your mammalian brain is designed to keep you safe.
Ooh.
So, Will, if you got up this morning and said, "Hey, I'm going to go skydiving," your brain would
Hmm.
be like, "Wait a minute, Will. The plane might crash, or your parachute may not open." It would put all kinds of things in your mind that would
Hmm.
stop you or try to stop you from doing that. But that's the thing you've got to realize. That's your brain trying to keep you safe. The only way we grow, the only way we improve, the only way we get better is if we step outside our comfort zones and we do those things that make us uncomfortable. That's how you get better. But those things are hard. Those things are
Yeah.
difficult. People may
Yeah.
ridicule you. They may
Hmm.
laugh at you. They may do, all the kind of things, especially young people,
Hmm.
But if you can get past that, you will grow. You will get better. And I think people don't, because it's hard. Why don't people, why isn't everybody out there
Hmm.
doing what they think? There's a guy by the name of Ed Milet. 2023 was
I
the
listen to him all
entrepreneur of
the
the year.
time.
Okay. So Milet's got the four types of people in the world, and I love this. First group he talks about are the unmotivated. And he said
Hmm.
that's the vast majority of people that you will encounter in your life. The second group he talks about are the motivated. He says it's kind of like a carrot and stick approach to life. If I do this, I will get that. He says it's kind of low level, but it works for a lot of people to have a very happy and successful life.
Hmm.
The third group he talks about are the inspirational people. The
Hmm.
word inspiration coming from two words, in spirit. So if you're an inspirational person, you move people with your energy.
Hmm.
And then the last group he talks about are the aspirational people, where people aspire to be like you. And depending on the group I'm talking to, sometimes I'll tell that story. I'm like, all right, show of hands, how many people are unmotivated? And nobody raises their hand. Nobody
Right,
says, oh,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah, that's me. I'm in the unmotivated category. But if you believe Milet, that's the vast majority of people you will encounter in your life. Which, it's like, yeah, it's bad for them, but think about how good it is for you if you're not like that. If you're an
Hmm.
inspirational or an aspirational person, you have just a little bit of grit. You
Yeah.
can do anything in your
Hmm.
life because those people just don't care. They've never bothered to find their purpose in life
Hmm.
and then live it. And
Yeah.
we all have a purpose. I mean, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, talks about we should not look at our life in the abstract. Everybody has a purpose. We almost have a moral obligation to find that purpose and to live it.
Yeah. Okay. So when you wrote the book, Four Truths and a Lie, how did you come up with that title and how does it connect to modern purpose?
Yeah, so when I wrote Sustainable Excellence, that was my first book. And I wrote
Hmm.
that in about 4 or 5 months while I was healing after I had my leg amputated.
Hmm.
And that was a book about success. And almost as soon as I published it, I kind of felt there was another book that I was supposed to write. And
Hmm.
that was also a book about another word that started with the letter S, and that was significance. Success is what we do for ourselves, significance is what we do for other people. And don't get me wrong,
Mm.
I think you can be both. You can be
Say that
successful.
again. Say that again.
So success is what we do for ourselves.
Hmm.
Significance is what we do for other people.
You got
And
to
I
get a
don't think
t-shirt
those are
with that.
mutually exclusive. You can be both. You
Yeah.
can be successful and you can be significant.
Hmm.
So, like I said, the first book took me 4 or 5 months. Four Truths and a Lie took me, I started it in right around Thanksgiving 2023, and I published
Hmm.
it in September of 2025. So almost 2 years to write it. And I had, I talked about these four truths in in podcasts, in so many podcasts. And it was really my daughter who said, you should call it Four Truths and a Lie. Because here are the four truths, but the lie is how we determine our self-worth. You listen, if you drive this car, if you wear these clothes, if you're on this team or in this club, then you're somebody. But if you're not, you're not. No, no,
Mm.
that's absolutely not the case. You have to determine, like people ask me, sustainable excellence, what does that mean? What is excellence? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're like,
Mm.
what do you mean you don't know? You wrote the book, Sustainable Excellence. How do you know what? I said, excellence to me is kind of like beauty. It's
Mm.
in the eye of the beholder.
Hmm.
You have to determine what excellence is for you. I
Mm.
mean, if you're taking an English class and you work really hard in that class, as hard as you can, and you get a C,
Hmm.
were you excellent? Versus the person who I didn't really work real hard in that class, but I got an A. Which one of those people was probably excellent?
The one who worked the hardest.
Yeah, the one who worked the hardest and got the C.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Oh, I got an A, so I'm great. Really? How hard did you work?
Mm.
No, I'm good in English. It didn't take me a month. No, I worked hard to get that C. You should be proud of that.
Mm.
Because I mean, let's face it, we all have different talents and gifts that God has given us. You may be great at math. I mean, if you told me to go be an accountant, I would fail miserably at that at that job. I'm better with words.
Mm.
And so, again, what are your strengths? What do you enjoy doing?
Yeah.
And I'll end with this. I wish I would have known this when I was young. So many times in life, you put those arbitrary mileposts out there. Say by the time I'm 25, I want to be making $100,000 a year. By the time
Mm,
I'm 35, I want to be married and have a family. And you just pick dates. That's what I want to do. And if you don't make it, somehow then you feel that you're not successful. And I really like this guy by the name of Jeff Wetzler. And he said, look at your life like this. He said, in your 20s, do everything and anything that interests you. He said, make all kinds of mistakes, blunder through stuff. He said, not for the sake of making mistakes, but for what you learn while when you make those mistakes. He said, then in your 30s, find those two or three things that you are really passionate about
hmm
and dig into them. And then he said in your 40s, when you're more established, you understand how life works, your prefrontal cortex is, finally come together in your brain and all that stuff. Find that one thing and give it everything you got.
mm,
And he said, then in your 50s and 60s and beyond, you will reap the rewards of living your life, everything in your 20s, two or three things in your 30s, and
yeah,
that one thing in your 40s. And,
yeah.
and that way you can't especially in your 20s, it's like do
hmm
everything. Yeah, I did that. I was terrible at it. But you know what? You did it anyway. That's okay. That's how you learn. That's how you
mm,
grow. Do those things. Don't be afraid to do things.
right. That's powerful. That's powerful, man. So let me switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
So as a former SWAT negotiator, a coach, and a cancer warrior, you've seen leadership under pressure. What is one negotiation lesson that applies to everyday life?
So I'll give you this formula that they
Okay.
gave us when we started negotiating. And it's
hmm
how we as human beings communicate with each other. And the formula is 7 38 55. And I'll tell you what that means, and then I'll tell you why they gave it to us.
hmm
So 7% of how a message is communicated are the words that we use.
Okay.
And think how many times you've said something and be like, "Ooh, I wish I wouldn't have said it," or I wish I would have said it a different way.
hmm
Only 7% of how that message comes across. 38% is the tone of voice that you use. Are you talking real fast and you can't wait to tell the person you're going like this? Or are you what I used to call do the Eeyore thing from Winnie the Pooh? We'll never make it. This is terrible. I can't get through. What's your tone of voice when you're using those words? And then 55%, so more than half of how that message comes across is your body language and your facial expressions.
Mm,
So we were given that formula because if somebody was barricaded with a gun in a room, we were not in the room with that person. That would not
hmm
have been safe.
Right.
So we didn't have the luxury of that 55%. We didn't have the luxury of saying something and be able to see the person, kind of roll their eyes like, oh, what an idiot. I can't believe Terry said
hmm
that to me and that kind of stuff. So we had to get good based on certainly what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying it. So understand when you communicate with somebody. I mean, and think about it, especially kids.
hmm
You're
hmm
talking to somebody, and if they're, on their phone going like this, what is their body language telling you?
hmm
It's like, you know what? I don't really care what you're saying. That's
Yeah.
not real
Yeah.
important to me. So understand that when somebody's talking to you, don't do that.
hmm
Give them your undivided attention.
hmm
Talk to them that way. I mean, the other thing is use people's names.
mm
I try to do that when I do podcasts. I've used your name several times and think that we like hearing our name.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
go that route. And I'll give you the last one. We never used or we rarely used why questions. So we would use how and what questions. And the reason we didn't use why questions is because when we were all growing up and we did something stupid as a kid, what would mom and dad say? Why did you do that?
Yeah.
It's a personal affront. So I can get
hmm
to the same thing. Instead of saying, Will, why did you wear that top today? Oh, does Terry not like what I'm wearing? Is there something wrong with that? I can get to the same thing with, Will, what made you decide to wear that today? It's a softer question. It
Yeah.
lands a little bit softer than the
Oh,
why
absolutely.
question.
Absolutely. Okay.
So
Okay. All right. When life hits its most unpredictable moments, which I know we both understand this, what's your go-to strategy to stay centered and on target?
honestly, I pray. I
Ah.
mean, I talk about what's gotten me through my life, certainly my cancer journey, or my three F's: faith, family, and friends, in
Mm-hmm.
that order. I, again, as I've told you before, this is bigger than me. So when somebody says, hey, your drug is discontinued and you got a tumor in your stump, uh, okay, guess I'm gonna have, we're gonna go through a little more pain now. I can, there's a reason. What am I supposed to learn? And, what's the meaning in the misery?
Mm.
We don't suffer in vain. What's the meaning in the misery? What's the message this is trying to teach
Mm.
you? It's trying to teach you something. What is it? And
Mm.
that's where I focus my energy. I don't focus on, yeah, this is going to hurt or this is
Right.
going to be uncomfortable. I focus on, what am I supposed to learn here?
Mm.
What's the strategy? God, what are you
Mm-hmm.
teaching me here? There's something going on here
Yeah.
that's bigger than me. Help me with this. So, when those things happen, I go to somebody who's bigger than me.
Yeah.
So I,
Yeah.
I, I try to take it upstairs and hopefully
Okay.
get the answer
Right.
that way.
Right. Right. To the man in charge. I got it.
Yes.
So, so do you think the most powerful messages or learning lessons have to involve pain? And if so, what are some of the most powerful, painful lessons you've had to learn in life?
I think pain can teach us a lot more than things that go well or things that
Yeah.
that go our way. Um, so when I was first diagnosed, like I said, they told me you'll probably be dead in 2 years. The only thing we have for you is surgery. So my
Hmm.
doctor put me on a drug called interferon, as she used to say, to kick the can down the road. She said it's not going to cure you. It's not, but we're just trying to kick the can down the road. And I would take a weekly interferon injection on Saturday night, and Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, I would be
Hmm.
so sick. It would be like the worst case of the
Hmm.
flu. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having a horrible case of the flu every week for 5 years and knowing this isn't going to cure me. I mean, you
Mm.
can go through a lot of pain knowing that, hey, this is going to help me in the end. This was just buying time.
Hmm.
And well, there was a point where I was so sick of being sick, I prayed to die. I was
Mm.
like, God, just take me, let my family get on with their life. I'm not really contributing in any way to my family
Hmm.
because I was so sick. And obviously, God didn't take me. He gave me the strength that I needed, to go on. I remember there was a time when I had a blood clot in my lung and I had fluid around the sac of my heart. I thought I was having a heart attack. I was sure I was going to die. And it was like, God, I, I don't want to die. How do I do this? How do I survive? I just don't think I have anything left. I am totally done. I am depleted emotionally, mentally, physically. And I remembered a conversation. I have a friend of mine, actually a man who works with my wife, who's a former Navy SEAL. And the SEALs have what they call their 40% rule.
Hmm.
And that basically says when you're done, when you're at the end of your rope, when you can't go on, you're only at 40% of your maximum and you have
Yeah.
another 60% left to give to yourself. So in that moment, I remembered that conversation and I'm like, as bad as I feel, if I believe Jonathan, I'm only at 40%. I still got another
Mm.
60% left to, and I found the resolve. I found the physical courage to say, you know what, I can handle this.
Man.
I'll get through it.
Yeah.
So it's things like that that, I think if you center yourself, you allow yourself to, to kind of calm down and not be, oh my God, all this stuff's going to happen, but to center yourself and be like, okay, how do I get through this?
Hmm.
What can I
Hmm.
do? Who can I go to?
Yeah.
And those are just two examples that I've been able to overcome.
So you were in a life and death situation where they said you were going to die,
Yeah.
but you still lived. But living and choosing to live are two different things. When did you choose to live, and how do you help other people to make that same choice?
I mean, from the get-go, I chose to live. I
Yeah.
I wanted I wanted to see my daughter graduate from high school. I
Mm,
wanted to see my daughter graduate from college. I wanted to walk her down the aisle, and I did. I walked her down the aisle on my prosthetic leg. And I found out a couple weeks ago my wife and we're going to be grandparents,
mhm,
so they're
mhm.
expecting a child. I wanted that. I had something to look forward to. And I think that's incredibly important. You have to have something to live for.
Yeah.
What are you living for? And I remember my wife worked with a woman who had a reoccurrence of her breast cancer. And she was going to this particular doctor and she was getting worse and worse. And I was like, why not tell her to go to the University of Colorado? University hospitals, they have clinical trials.
Mhm.
They're constantly doing research. I'm like, she's getting worse. What does she have to lose to go and do this? And she never did. And she died. And she had a
Mm,
kid in high school. And I remember thinking, I can't understand that mindset. I can't understand, if I'm going to go giving it everything I possibly have. I'm going to put as much life into living as I possibly can. I'm not just going to acquiesce and give up and say, No, everything's fine now."
uh-huh.
So I think you've got to have something to look forward to, and you've got to have something inside of you that says, I am not going to quit. I don't
Mm.
care how bad this gets. I don't care how much pain I'm in. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think we all have a breaking point,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
I think that breaking point is so much further down the road than
Mhm,
we ever give ourselves credit for. We quit, we give up, we give in
mhm,
long before, and I'll bring this full circle because our brains tell us this hurts, this is uncomfortable,
mhm.
stop doing this.
Yeah.
We know from marathon runners hit that wall. They get to that
Mhm,
point during the marathon that they hit a wall. I can't go on. But if you push through that, all of a sudden you get your second wind and you can finish the race.
mhm.
Make your life like a marathon runner. When things get hard, push through them and see what happens on the other side. You might get that second wind.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful. So, how do you help people retrain their mind to embrace the pain, to almost reprocess their purpose when they may or may not have been an athlete? I know it's easy when, we come from an athletic background where we've had to do uncomfortable things, win
Hmm?
sprints until you threw up 4 times and,
Yeah,
saw Jesus.
right.
I mean, we've gone through that, but just in some of the counseling situations I've had, some people don't have that experience to draw upon to understand that this pain is temporary, it's not eternal, and that there is another level where you can rise above it with determination and focus and faith. How do you translate that to somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of the same way that I would, like if we were running a play in basketball and somebody did something that they shouldn't have done, you stop, you blow the whistle. And I used to say to them, what were you thinking? What did you see?
Mm,
Because I want to know where you're coming from. And by articulating that, by being able to say, oh, I thought, Mary was going to set a screen or something like
mhm,
that, but it didn't happen, and that's why I did what I did. Okay, that makes sense. And then, you keep going with those it's like negotiating. And what could you have done? What
mm,
what do you think you should have done? And again, a good counselor doesn't give people the answers. A good counselor asks questions to
mm,
people to lead them to come up with the answers themselves. And I think that's what you've got to do. Like, yeah, I can tell you, yeah, you should have done this, you should have done that, but that's not going to be as impactful for you as if I ask enough questions to get you, oh, yeah,
mm,
now I see where you're
mm,
coming from.
mhm,
Now I think, oh, because now you've got it imprinted on your mind. You came up with the answer. I didn't give it to you. You
mm,
came up with the answer. So I asked those how and what questions. What do you think you should have done? How do you think that would have paired out? And I think it's important in life for all of us. And we were taught this as negotiators. Be curious.
yes, yes,
Be curious in life. What happened there?
mhm,
And people say, well, I'm gonna need a car and I'm gonna need a pizza and I'm gonna need it in 5 minutes.
mhm,
You're gonna need it in 5 minutes and then go silent.
Mm,
we don't like silence as human beings, the other person will start talking.
mm,
And the more they talk, the more information you get to ask a better question.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's that curious tone. Oh, you don't think you can do that?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then go quiet, and now they start thinking, oh, well, I said I couldn't do it. Well, maybe I could. How do you think you could have done that? Or what do you think you could have done differently? Again, let them arrive at the solution. Don't give it to them. I mean, I think that's the worst thing we can
Yeah.
do, especially for our young kids, is do things for them that they could do for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And helicopter parents, and I was a helicopter parent, it's like I'm going to solve my kids' problems. And that was the worst thing I could have done.
Mm,
No, you got to
mm.
solve your own problems.
Right.
You got to figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. So with curious questions,
Yeah.
you lead them to the path, but you don't make the path for them.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
you let them come to the
Uh-huh.
realization.
Yeah, and with what I do with a lot of clients, I look at myself almost like an investigative reporter,
Yeah.
you know, because I really want to know. I want to know all the angles and all the pieces, and the more they talk, the more they start to piece it together themselves. There's a magic in the verbalization of the thought process, and it's almost like you could see them like putting the pieces together as their words start to form. And I love that part where they all of a sudden you see that aha moment, like, yes.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's very cool. That's very
it
cool.
is.
So for listeners who are currently in a season of struggle and burnout, what is your heartfelt advice to take them to the next breakthrough step?
I would tell them, kind of like the Fred Rogers story. What can you give? When you're
Mm,
in that, it's all about me. Things are terrible. Things are piling up on me. I always try to get outside of that. You got
hmm.
to get outside. You got to get out of your own way.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
because you're so upset, you're so depleted. I can't do this as hard as I'm never going to figure it out. I'm never going to. It's all me, 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 me,
Mm,
me. Make it about somebody else. Go find somebody else
mm.
to help. Now you're not focused on you, you're
Yeah.
focused on somebody else. And don't think for a minute that your life doesn't matter, that this isn't important, that you can't learn something.
Mm,
Now, I'll give you another story. When I was started in the infusion center, there was a young nurse. She was about 25, already a nurse, but she was learning how to do things on the unit where I was treated. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came into my room and she said, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I'm not sure how to tell it to you. And Will, I was like, how do you respond to that?
mm,
I mean, somebody, I'm like, well, I hope you decide you want to tell me. It sounds like it might be a good story. So she's in and out and finally comes in, sits down. She said, all right, here's the story. She said, when I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I had a good friend of mine die. I was in a really dark place. I talked to my family. I was going to quit nursing and I was going to go to work for Amazon.
hmm.
And she said, then I met you. And I see every day you come in, and I had a terrible reaction to the drug they gave me. She said, but you come back every single day. You never miss, no matter how bad you're hurting. And she said, I went back in your file and I read everything, your foot amputated, your leg amputated, all the drug treatments. And she said, when I finished reading your story, I knew I was where I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Now, if she would have never told me that
Yeah.
story,
Say.
I would have
Mm,
had no idea that just the way I was living my
hmm.
life had such a positive impact on this young nurse. So anybody who's listening to us, you're down, you're depressed, you don't think, life doesn't have a purpose or a meaning. I promise you, there's maybe more than just
Mm,
one out there watching how you handle your adversity and would give almost everything they have just to walk 5 minutes in your shoes. So
hmm.
don't ever think your life doesn't matter. You were here, you were put here for a reason. There's a purpose.
Yeah.
Find that purpose, no matter how much pain you have to go through, and then live
Mm.
that purpose.
I remember when I was working in Ohio and I ran an independent living skills program for teenagers. And, teenagers are generally genetically probably the most selfish creatures on the
Sure.
planet until they grow up. Um, and and I remember getting them to volunteer with me for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And that encounter with other teenagers who were about to die, who were actually more focused and faith driven and happy than they were, was such a mind shift for them, and for me too.
Yeah,
But I always encourage people when they're struggling. I say, go do some volunteer work. You know, do the service that other people need to kind of get you out of yourself. Because
yeah,
it there is something powerful in that. Because I know some people say, well, I don't have anybody and I don't have anything. Well, then go find somebody.
yeah,
Go find a church or a volunteer organization and do something outside of yourself, bigger than yourself, as you said. And
yeah.
it's powerful mojo. It's powerful, powerful mojo.
It is.
Um, with one breakthrough insight, what is one breakthrough insight that you're currently working through that you think will benefit our audience today?
Um, so right now, I had this breakthrough very early treatment called TIL, where they took a tumor out, grew a bunch of my T cells in a lab, and then gave me billions of those T cells back with the idea that those T cells are programmed to look for my cancer and to kill it. And unfortunately, I'm having some really bad side effects
Mm,
of that right now, where I may get cured from the cancer, but I may be I may have these really bad side effects. And
hmm
so, I guess I got comfortable, to be honest with you. I got comfortable because I knew my treatment. I knew what was going to happen. I knew how bad it was going to be. I was like, I can handle this. I'm good at this. And now I've had to totally switch to now this is something entirely different. This is an entirely different problem that I need to confront, and it's not cancer. You kind of, it's like I may be cured from cancer when I was told 14 years ago that I'd probably be dead in 2 years, but the side effect is I may have either a chronic or a permanent issue that is not going to be good.
hmm
And so it's really kind of putting that mindset into a different gear. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, the cancer stuff, yeah, I get it. I'm good with it. Now I gotta transfer. I gotta focus on
hmm
this. And there's no answers yet. And
mm
that's one of the biggest frustrations for me is, what's the answer? What are we doing? I'm having all these tests. What's wrong? We don't know. We
mm
don't know what's wrong. That's how new this technology is. We've never had anybody have this problem that you're having. And so I'm having to focus on that. At the same time, I'm having to try to figure out how to get my mother into a memory care facility. She's 90 years old
hmm
and that. So, I'm dealing with my own issue,
mm
but what am I doing? I'm going to focus on how I can help my mom
Right.
get into the best facility that she can be in where she can get the help that she needs. So, you know, you have to, you just you have to live your life, understand that based on all the things I've done in my life, I've overcome a lot of things. I'm going to overcome this, but I'm also now focused on helping another individual.
mm
It just happens to be my mom. It doesn't have to be your mom. It could be the kid being bullied at your
Yeah.
school. You know
Yeah.
what? Have lunch with that kid.
hmm
Make a difference. So I don't know if that answers your question,
Well,
but
it did because what you're saying is that, the mission's not over and the fight's not
no,
over.
no.
We've got more work to do, and it's the struggle is what makes us extraordinary.
And that's so important. Well, that's everybody thinks it's when I get to the top of the mountain, when I get to the end of the rainbow, that's when I'm going to be. And
hmm
and you realize, no,
Yeah.
it was the journey
Yeah.
all along, to
Uh-huh.
that. And when you understand that, when you find people that care about you, that are willing to invest in you, that want you to be successful, and you hitch your wagon to those people and you climb your mountains together, you realize it's the journey. It's
Yeah.
not the destination.
Hmm. Yeah, and on this journey, we collect people and dreams and hopes in our life that are looking and following us. When I do my closing speech, I say I come as one by to represent 1,000 because 1,000 people and more have poured into me, and I don't have the right to quit. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, you are an inspiration to people just by the way you live your life.
Hmm. Hmm. It's
And we
humbling
can
and
all,
inspiring and terrifying at the same time.
sure, sure. Wouldn't be any fun if it was easy.
Right,
You know, you
right,
want
right. Well, man, thank you for being on my show, man. I really, really appreciate it. You sharing from your heart the journey, the message, about excellence, sustainable excellence are all, powerful mojo. Because it's about who we become and how we impact others along the way. The significance part I'm going to take with me, about serving others. I'm going to be repeating that. I'm probably going to steal that.
to feel it. No problem at all.
But to our listeners, if today's conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to check out Terry Tucker's new book, Sustainable Excellence. And how many books have you written?
So sustainable excellence was the first one, and
Yeah.
then four truths and a lie was the second one.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. All right. And his second book, Four Truths and a Lie, which I definitely think is really a must read. The insight he shared today is just the beginning. Are you writing anything else that I should tell the viewers?
Um, no, not at this point in time.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet, exactly.
Hey guys, remember balance isn't about perfection, it's about alignment. And breakthroughs don't always come from avoiding adversity, but from meeting it head on with faith, resilience, and purpose. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, share this with someone who needs encouragement, and to continue the conversation with us about this because we're going to be doing more stories like this that are inspiring and powerful about real people who have real stories who become real heroes. And Terry Tucker is a real hero on the show tonight. So until next time, stay balanced, stay intentional, and keep pushing towards your breakthrough. I'm Wil Singleton, and this is Balance and Breakthroughs. And I love you guys, and I'll see you next time. Peace.